Hello, everyone. Lloyd Brooks again, and as you can see, um, so what we're going to look at is the dating of the Gospels, and it's going to actually look at the manuscripts and evidence that's of the dating of the Gospel. It's not really promoted a lot, so let's get into it. So let me go to Bart Ehrman. Now, the thing about it is, when I'm using Bart Ehrman, even though he's agnostic, he's probably one of the most influential textual scholars that there is. You know, he edits a lot of books on textual criticism, etc. So Bart Ehrman, he represents the main scholarly view. So the Gospel of Matthew was written a decade or two after Mark, is what he says, in the 80s or early 90s AD. Author of Matthew was likely writing during a time of growing hostility and conflict between Christian Jews, non-Christian Jews, and Jews towards the end of the first century. So when the Gospel of Mark was written, the year was approximately 70 AD. And at this time, Jesus' followers are a mix of Jewish and Gentile. So just to um, look at that, one of the things modern scholars talk about is this mystical document or Q. There's no evidence for it. It's just something where they say that Mark was written first and Matthew and Luke derived out of Mark, which is the shortest gospel out of all of them. But the witnesses of the early fathers unanimous, and it's a very new and novel view that Mark was written first. It's fairly what 150 years, maybe 200. But the early church fathers unanimous that Matthew was the first gospel. So for some reason why being, and we'll see in later why Bart Ehrman and modern scholars say that the Gospels are written quite late. So the common consensus of John and its dating is around 90 AD, and additional layer of mystique to this Gospel seems to have two endings, one at the end of chapter 20 and again next chapter. This is what Bart Ehrman saying, it's not me. The dating of the Gospel of Luke, some places early as the 80s and 90s, and other scholars timestamping around the year 120 AD. Popular opinion still leans towards Luke's Gospel being written a decade or two later than Mark's, which is a bit crazy. When they put Luke being at 120 AD, we have a portion of John's Gospel, which is found in Egypt, that was dated about AD 125 in Egypt. So, and it's unanimous really that John was the last one that was written. But let's go on. Opinions on fact. The short answer is there's no direct empirical evidence, such as dating original manuscripts, proving the Gospels were written late. Now, one of my roles at work is that I chair employment tribunal, not employment tribunals, HR, disciplinary, various hearings, and also I do investigations. And one of the things we do with investigations, or we make a judgment, it has to be on fact. And also, we work on what we call balance of probabilities. So, where it's a bit sort of gray area, we work on the balance of probabilities. So, really, there's no empirical evidence, um, no evidence really, apart from a prejudice against the prophetic word of Jesus. So, let's go into that. Right? Why scholars go for a late dates? So, what I call the hermeneutic of suspicion. A good friend of mine, Mike, he came up with this one, the hermeneutic of suspicion. So basically, it all centers around Mark 13, Matthew 24, and Luke 21, which Jesus prophesies the destruction of the temple. Now, if you're an supernaturalist or you do not believe in the supernatural or anti-prophecy, the detail so it's so detailed that they believe that it was written after. Now, the Bible, anyone who reads the Bible, and I don't think reads his Bible anymore, but let's look at this point here. The Bible is clear when it's prophecy. It's clear when a prophecy has been fulfilled in the time of the book. So you have short-term prophecies, medium-term, long-term. For example, in the book of Acts, there was a prophecy there was going to be a famine, and there was a famine, and it's recorded in history. It was fulfilled during that time. Um, so there's a number of prophecies throughout the Bible that was fulfilled in a particular time. And this is why scholars were very much against the book of Daniel, because it was so meticulous with detail. Isaiah. The Apostle Isaiah was so much in detail that they said it had to be written after the fact because of so much detail. So that brings into question that the person speaking must be a liar or being deceitful, claiming to be a prophet, but really they were speaking after the fact. And so modern scholars, by saying that the prophecies of Jesus were after the fact, is implying that the words of Jesus was basically deceitful, or the disciples were deceitful, the apostles were deceitful. They tried to lead people to believe that Jesus prophesied the events when really it was done after it. So it besmirches the witness of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, the thing about it is, if somebody's a lawyer or if you look in court, unless the witness can demonstrate that they're unfaithful witness, an untrustworthy witness, you have to believe them. So to say use your prejudice against the prophetic nature of the Bible is not enough. You have to come with hard evidence or balance of probability. So the balance of probability is that they weren't telling the truth, that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are untrustworthy witnesses. That's the argument. You can't argue because we don't believe in biblical prophecy. It was written after the fact. You can't just stop there. You have to say that these people, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were deceitful and unfaithful witnesses because they tried to pass off prophecy when really it's written after the fact. So it's not a matter of just a late date. It actually impinges on the character of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So he predicts the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. Many critical scholars argue the predictions so specific, they're more likely reflecting the knowledge of the events of the Jewish war after they happened rather than beforehand. So this is a hermeneutic of suspicion. So one of the things I want to deal with, the area that's not really dealt with, is the colophon. So these are scribal notes at the end of a manuscript. So some of them will say, this is written by, and I'll use example, Lloyd Crook, in the year, and sometimes the colophons will give the year the manuscript was copied. So these are little notes, or scribal notes, not part of the text, but giving you great information about the manuscript, or it may even talk about the person who commissioned the copy of that particular manuscript. Yeah. So it's something that's not really sort of gone into regarding the date of the manuscripts. Yeah. So that's why you look at, for example, Family 35. We know the dates when these manuscripts were written because they have a number of known as colophons, these little notes at the end. Right. So an example of a colophon in 545, yeah? VA 545. It says this divine and sacred tetra evangelon, which means the four Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, was completed through collaboration because of desire and expense of the noble and honored man Kier Nikolaos of Lardea. This book was copied by me, most worthless and flawed among all good people, a villager, a scribe, Theodorus Kostas from the region of Tethonoi. The book was finished in the year 6938 from the creation of the world, an eighth indiction from the year of the incarnation of Christ in the year 1430. So this is an example of a colophon that gives detail of who commissioned the copying, um, and it's also giving the year it was actually written. So here's a pictures of colophon in GA 545. Colophon in GA lectionary 224, minuscule 1424. If you look towards the left-hand side and look at the top, you see these little notes, these little scribal notes. See that? Okay. Minuscule 124 from family 13. So according to the colophons at the end of their respective gospels, the Gospel of Matthew was written in Hebrew 8 years after the Lord's ascension. This AD 41, 42. That of Mark was written in Latin 10 years after the ascension. All right, so that's 2 years after Matthew, and Luke 15 years after, and John 32 years after. So all these are before AD 70. So family 1313, known as the Ferrara group, is a group of Greek gospel manuscripts date from the 11th to the 15th century, which share a distinctive pattern of variant readings, right? All I thought to derive from a lost magisterial gospel manuscript, probably from the 7th century. It takes its name from minuscule 13 now in Paris. It's a bit like minuscule 35, um, which Wilbur Pickering calls family 35. So, as I mentioned, which leads into it, it's 35, the 11th century manuscript that contains the four Gospels and displays these traditional chronological markers at the end of each Gospel. Codex 18, the family 35, written should be minuscule. The family 35 manuscript family, many of roughly 500 surviving manuscripts in the family 35 subgroups known as Codex 183, and they include these specific scribal notes. So it's well attested in the manuscripts themselves, the manuscripts themselves. So the colophons in 50% for manuscripts, including family 35, not just family 35, say that Matthew published 8 years after the ascension of the Christ. Since Christ ascended in AD 30, Matthew released from AD 38 AD, Mark was published 2 years later, 40 AD, Luke 5 years later, 45 AD, and John 62 AD. Okay. So this is what the colophons, the manuscripts, the scribes would be copying, and they'd make these notes. And you got here, you can see the colophon at the bottom here. All right. Now, this is from Thomas Ross. I pinched it from him. You have a great video on this as well. I think he dealt with Matthew's Gospel, but it's really great video, Thomas Ross. So, colophon and Usul K, end of the Gospel according to Matthew, published by him in Jerusalem 8 years after the ascension of Christ. So, we're talking about early dates. This is actually in the manuscripts themselves. So, let's look at internal evidence. Now, this is very interesting. Also got this from Thomas Ross as well. I have to give credit where credit's due. Matthew 10, verse 2. Now, the names of the 12 apostles are these. Yeah. The first Simon, which is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. So you look in the Greek there, estin, look it up in bold, it's in the present active indicative. So it's talking about in the present tense. But let's look at what the other gospel writers say. Now, we notice James was killed when the apostles were Acts 12:2, killed very early. AD 44. James, the brother of John, also James, son of Zebedee, was killed around AD 44, right? And he was killed by order of Agrippa, right? Now, historians date this event to AD 44, right? So let's bear that in mind, yeah? So remember, Matthew used the word, the present indicative tense, when they were naming the apostles. Does that make a difference? Is it interesting? I find it interesting when we go to the next slide. Now, notice Mark 3, verse 17, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, his surname, Boanerges, which is the sons of thunder. And that's the aorist past tense. So he would have been dead by this time. So Mark refers to him in the past tense, where in Matthew refers in the present tense. Why? Because he would still have been alive at that time. Luke as well. He refers to him in the past tense, talks about the past tense. Also, we look at Luke's gospel. For this in Timothy, this is Paul's prison epistles, and these are all before AD 70, in the early 60s. For the scripture saith, and he says the scripture saith, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth the corn, and the labor is worthy of his reward or his hire. And you see there in terms of the Greek in 1 Timothy 5:18 and Luke 10, verse 7, and the same house remain eating and drinking of such things as they give, for the labor is worthy of his hire. And you could see the Greek, um, the similarities of the Greek. Yeah, you can see that for yourself, you scholars. You destruction of Jerusalem. The arguments for it being early date is an interesting note. When you read the Gospels, it's always talking about in the future tense. Um, so Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there cannot be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, it's normally future passive indicative, but more so than that, the disciples asked, when shall these things be? Now, in all Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're asking when these things shall be. If it already happened, they wouldn't need to ask that. They wouldn't need to ask that. And going back to my original point, is that the modern scholars impinge on the integrity of the writers of the gospel by passing something off that is not, passing off prophecy when really it wasn't prophecy. All right, so temple destroyed. This is also a future tense about the stones being cast down. Now, the real issue really is why would the disciples ask, when shall these things be, if it already happened? Irenaeus, Matthew's also written a gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect, while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome and laying the foundations of the church. Now, it's clearly before AD 70 because they both died in the 60s. All right. And after their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, could also hand to us in writing what was preached by Peter. Luke, also the companion of Paul, recorded in the book the gospel preached by him. Afterwards, John, the disciples of the Lord, also in the rest himself published the gospel during his residence at Ephesus in Asia. So, and it's interesting, after their departure, that word, I believe that word is Exodus, which can relate to death or their martyrdom. But we know they both died in the 60s, way before AD 70. And also, we'll notice in the book of Acts, it doesn't mention the death of Peter and Paul. It mentions the death of James, it doesn't mention the death of Peter and Paul. And if you read the book of Acts, it seems to end quite suddenly. Let's look closer, right? Also, there's a fact there that the Jews were expelled from Rome in 49 AD. So, Acts 18, verse 2, it tells about this event. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came with them. So, so you've got that issue there. Okay. Arguments for the early dating of the gospel. Now, one of the things is that Acts concludes with Paul still alive under house arrest in Rome. It says nothing about Paul's execution, Peter's martyrdom, or the Nero's persecution, or the destruction of Jerusalem. It mentions a famine. It mentions other events, but it doesn't mention that. Let's go on. The temple. Jesus predicts the temple, the destruction of the temple. Early advocates argue that if the temple had already been destroyed in AD 70, the evangelist probably explicitly noted the fulfillment, as biblical writers often do with fulfilled prophecy. So the Bible not shy about talking about when prophecies have been fulfilled. Big thing here, and I have some knowledge of this, is that the church structure. Now, when you look at the church structure in the book of Acts, right? And we know the Gospels were written during the time of Acts or before, is that it was fairly simplified structure. You had elders, he said appoint elders. So it was actually quite a flat structure. So you had prophets, you had teachers. But Paul is saying to Timothy in his last letters, his prison epistles, to appoint elders in every city. Now, if you read the sub-apostolic fathers like Ignatius and Polycarp, the church structure changed quite quickly. So after the destruction of the temple, the structure of church was around a mono bishop. Yeah. So you notice about honoring the bishop, treat him as you would treat God. You see the early germs of the papacy coming about. So the structure wasn't about a body of elders, as you see in the book of Acts, but it became around one leader. One. So you see that the structure of Acts was the primitive structure of the church. If it was written after that, you would see a different structure. You know? And also, just throw in here, is that Jesus made numerous reference, but don't swear by the temple. If the temple's been destroyed, Jesus wouldn't need to say, Do not swear by the temple. Um, if you have aught against your brother, lay your gift at the altar. Now, if the Gospels were written afterwards, there'd be no need to say that. It'd be like a strange thing. Like, when you say to young kids now, um, back in my day, there was only one phone in the house, no mobile phones, no Wi-Fi, no internet. Young people look at you like you're mad. That was really primitive. You know what I mean? It's like a different world. So the early fathers, quite consistent, that Matthew was first. Um, and who wrote them? They actually give witness to who wrote them. We connects Mark to Peter, Peter's preaching in Rome, Matthew to apostolic traditions, um, and it names the people. So modern scholars, they don't even believe that Matthew wrote Matthew and Mark wrote Mark, and John didn't write John. So but there's no evidence for it. But I would say that modern text scholars, controversy does sell. Controversy does sell, and we live in an age where people are not critical thinkers, and they say, okay, what does the other side say? Yeah. Arguments against the temple prophecy looks like a knowledge after the event. This is the main argument. It's, I said, the hermeneutic of suspicion. And so much detail was given, it must have been written afterwards. For those acceptive predictive prophecy obviously reject this argument, it remains highly influential in modern scholarship. So the evidence for early witness of the Gospels, early ones of the Gospel, is quite strong. We have the witness of the in the manuscripts. We have the internal witness of the scriptures. We have the witness of the early church fathers, but there's no really witness for a late reading. And I said controversy sells. People want to make money, they'd be controversial. But there's no empirical witness. So I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Right. And God bless you, God keep you, and may he cause his face to shine upon you, all the way from sunny England. Take care.